If you are breathing, you have a mother and you should be celebrating her this weekend. It's Mother's Day on Sunday, and at the special report, we are here for it. We are talking to four amazing mothers on the trials and triumphs of motherhood in the era of mass shootings, police violence, and a national reckoning on race and racism. I also go one-on-one with a highly acclaimed author who has written a comprehensive and compelling book on the impact of Black motherhood on America, and three mothers, Louise, Alberta, and Bertus, whose sons, Malcolm, Martin, and James, changed the course of U.S. history. All coming up next.
Live from Los Angeles, this is the Special Report.
In 1914, Mother's Day was officially recognized as a national holiday. We have President Woodrow Wilson to thank for setting aside the second Sunday of each month to celebrate mothers. Now, there's no consensus on which of about 5 women are to be credited with creating a day to recognize mothers, although Anna Jarvis is often referenced as the architect of the campaign to get President Wilson to recognize the day. Now, Anna wasn't about the commercialization of the day. She railed against Hallmark cards, flowers, and fancy gifts. She saw this as a day for social activism. Today, we're celebrating Mother's Day in a way that is most true to its roots. We are expressing unconditional gratitude to mothers around the globe, and we are lifting up those mothers who have been fighting for the rights of others and making their mark on the world. My first guest has written a highly acclaimed book about 3 mothers whose children changed the course of U.S. history. Please welcome Anna Malaika Tubbs. She's an educator, a doctoral candidate at Cambridge University, a diversity and inclusion expert, and the author of The 3 Mothers: How the Mothers of Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, and James Baldwin Shaped the Nation. Welcome to the show, Anna.
Thank you so much for having me.
First, I want to say congratulations on your book. Your book just came out 2 months ago and has gotten incredible reviews. I was reading like this whole list of amazing reviews: the New York Times bestsellers, Editor's Choice, Amazon Editor's Pick, Ms. Magazine, Most Anticipated Read for 2021, and the list kind of goes on and on and on. Did you ever think that the response to your book would be as enormous as it has been?
It has been wild. It has been such a blessing, such an epic experience, just to see not only for my own work, but that Alberta, Bertus, and Louise are getting the recognition that they deserve. The fact that Amazon put it on a billboard in New York City, it has surpassed my wildest dreams. And I'm so excited because it's just the beginning. Like you said, it came out in February, perfect timing for Black History Month. Of course, we had a great Women's History Month. And now I'm just feeling all the excitement again around Mother's Day. Celebrities are posting about it. It's wonderful to be in conversation with you. I'm just so honored by all of the love that's being poured into it.
Oh my God. Yeah, I was just super excited because we were trying to figure out what to do for Mother's Day, and we've been profiling Black authors, and we had done a bunch of men, and we of course wanted to have a female. So to have a Black woman who's written about 3 other amazing Black women, all mothers, your mother, their mothers, it couldn't be more perfect for us. So I want to dive into the book for folks who haven't gotten it, and after this show, everybody should run out and get it if you haven't bought this book, 3 Mothers, about the mothers of Malcolm X, Dr. King, and James Baldwin. Why those 3? I mean, there's so many iconic civil rights and influencers, African American influencers. Why Malcolm, Dr. King, and James Baldwin? Why their mothers?
It was partly strategic. I knew that more people would pick up the book if it had to do with MLK Jr., Malcolm X, and James Baldwin. And I was kind of trying to give them a hook, and then still say, gotcha, this is still a woman's story. This is still about the women behind them, the communities that raised them. So I wanted to make sure that people were excited and then also felt like they took away so much more than they even expected from the book. And Alberta, Bertus, and Louise were all born within 6 years of each other. Their famous sons were all born apart more than 5 years of each other. And when I discovered that fact, I said, this is going to be incredible. I can talk about American history, and each chapter is a decade of their lives. We see these events playing out through their eyes and their different situations and circumstances. And it's just beautiful to get this new understanding of history in this way.
How difficult was it to do research? Because as you said, these are women who are not household names. Of course, their sons are. You know, we read about their sons in history. We talk about them. We know about them from pop culture, but we don't know a whole lot about their mothers. So how difficult was it to do the research for the book?
Incredibly difficult. And I'm so grateful that you're giving me the opportunity to speak about that, because before this book, you couldn't go to Google really and say, who is Louise Little? You could maybe find a few facts about her, but these were taken out of context or they weren't fully explained. So I really had to dive deep into being creative with my methods, reaching out to scholars who were experts in the men, calling local historians the different places where the women lived, analyzing census data. And that was, extremely difficult. Burtis doesn't show up on census data at all. So then I had to go and see what James Baldwin had said about her. He said that her sister had raised her, that her mother had passed away young. So then I look for Beulah in the census data and find her. So I had to get extremely creative. But just to give an example with Louise Little, for instance, of how terrible the history had been and the record keeping of her life, it was said that she had quote unquote gone crazy. And this is why her children were taken away from her. But in reality, the more I dug and found information, what happened was that she was this radical activist who was standing up for herself, standing up for her rights. She was well known by the KKK and the Black Legion, another white supremacist group. And after her husband was murdered, she wanted to take care of her children. She didn't want to depend on the state. She was a radical Marcus Garvey follower. And so she stands up for herself and really asserts that she should be treated with respect and with dignity. And a white male doctor comes and diagnoses her with dementia, saying word for word, she is imagining being discriminated against. And this was enough to put her away against her will in an institution for 25 years of her life.
Wow. Yeah. And that's so unfortunate, because we've been talking a lot about how Black history is distorted and how, misunderstood so many Black historical figures are, and how important it is that we remove the whitewash that has been there as it relates to Black history. So thank you for telling us, the factual story about Louise Little, because you're right that the little that has, the small amount that's been written about her does tell that story of her somehow, having some kind of, mental health issue or mental health breakdown that caused her to lose her children and then to be institutionalized. So thank you for putting that into perspective. One thing that I found interesting as I was reading all of these amazing reviews was the book has been called a love letter to these three women. Help us understand what what that means when the critics and even you maybe consider this a love letter to these three brilliant women.
It's an honor when my goals for the book are then, reflected in these reviews. When someone says something, I'm going to say, yes, that's what I'm going for. When someone says love letter, or when someone says it's a combination with a manifesto as well as a biography, those were all the elements of the book that I cared deeply about. I wanted to make sure not only that this was a love letter to the three of them, but to Black womanhood and motherhood, because it's so often misrepresented. With Black women, we are not given many opportunities to be seen as whole human beings who both experience grief as well as joy, as well as love, as well as life, that we have nuanced experiences. We're different from one another. That's one of the incredible strengths of our community. It's how we've continued to affirm each other and fight for our life and fight for our children's lives. And especially with motherhood, it is so uncelebrated, so unrecognized, unappreciated. And I just wanted to do something to change that. And so it really is a love letter to them without over romanticizing anything. I definitely present the conflicts and the complexities of motherhood and the relationship with that. But I also believe it's just time that we have a culture shift around this. And especially Black mothers, we deserve this. We deserve to be seen. We deserve to be celebrated. I wanted other Black moms to pick this up and just feel healing, and this feeling of I see you and I hope you see me, and we're just going to keep doing this together.
Wow, that's amazing. And that's what I love about the book is it's about these three women, but it's really about all mothers, and particularly African-American mothers. You said at the beginning that you settled on these women for strategic reasons, and I've written 3 books, so I know you've got to be strategic. at the end of the day, you got to sell books to write more books. So, kudos to you for figuring that out really early on with your first book. But they were born 6 years apart. So that means they all grew up in this really racist Jim Crow era of our country. Help us understand how these three women navigated, those experiences and what they taught their super successful, iconic sons about America and this, systemic racism.
It's so cool because in the book, I'm trying to really emphasize their differences, like I was saying earlier, in terms of the ways in which Black women have been put into these boxes and into these categories was something that I wanted to completely do without and get rid of. But there are many similarities in their stories, and some of them are very painful. The reality that even though they came from very different backgrounds, they had different levels to opportunity, to education and privileges, they were still in many ways treated the same because they were Black women in this time period. And those are the moments that just really tug at my heart and even remind me of how much I relate to some of the fears that they faced as Black women and as Black mothers. So Louise Little was born in Grenada, so she's not born in the US with Jim Crow reigning here, but she is seeing and witnessing the effects of colonization, European colonization. And her grandparents and her mother teach her, you have to stand up for yourself. You have to stand up for your Black independence and your Black pride. And so something that the other more beautiful part of the intersection in their story is the way in which they each teach their children to be aware of what's happening in the world, to be aware that, yes, Jim Crow is something that's happening. There are people that are not going to see you in the way you deserve to be seen, but to not be limited by that, to not allow yourself to think that you're confined by other people's myopic notions of your identity, but instead to say, these are tactics that we as a family have used to fight for our freedom. Alberta King marching, leading boycotts, being a member of the NAACP alongside her husband, using their religion, their faith to advance freedom causes forward. Louise Little saying again, I will do whatever it takes. I will never bow down to my oppressors. She's a writer for the Negro World newspaper, Marcus Garvey follower, like I said. Berta Baldwin is a writer who believes that she can help people with her writing and gifts all of her loved ones these letters on how to move past hatred and move past pain to find healing together. And so in their many different ways, they're saying the same thing to their children. Know what's happening in the world. You cannot be ignorant to that, but do not be limited by it. And we are walking right beside you in this fight. And it's also your time to join us.
Yeah, I love the section in the book about Berta Baldwin writing these beautiful letters to her kids, like the school teachers and the school administrators, and even, the staff at the schools being just like wowed by the beauty of her writing. And then I guess she wrote the most amazing birthday greetings, to her kids and to her family members. Again, just some great information about these women.
I mean, it's something I aspire to as a mother, to be noticed that I'm a writer simply because of a letter I wrote to excuse my son's absences. I don't even know how you make that beautiful, but if a principal picked that up and said he clearly inherited his writing talent from his mother based off of this note, well, I mean, someday I'm going to write something just as beautiful, just so people know I'm a writer.
And you talk in the book about how, again, the intersectionality of the three women, that they all had this passion for, different forms of the art, whether it's writing or poetry or music, and how they use that as a form of resistance. Help us, give us a little more context about that, because that's really interesting that, you think of writing poetry or music as a form of resistance.
In writing this book, I just really realized how Black women have such a vision for the future. We focus on the future because we can't accept the circumstances as they are, not only again for our children, but for ourselves. We don't believe that we should be treated the way that we are treated. We believe that laws and systems need to change. So there's always this forward thought and imagination and creativity. And I think that that's why so many Black women, and especially in the case of Bertus, Alberta, and Louise, they were creative in their own ways. Bertus as a writer, Louise also as a writer, all three of them actually very well educated, using their understanding of language to advance causes forward, but as well as Alberta being a singer and an instrumentalist and wanting to teach the people around her how to find their way to express themselves through this kind of art, through their music, and training them to really get their voices out there in these other ways. And I just find that to be a testament once again to this vision for what can be possible, and not allowing ourselves to be stuck in a time or stuck in the mentality that others around us have of what they think is possible. It reminds me even, when Vice President Kamala Harris was running for her presidency, and so many people were saying, oh, the U.S. isn't ready for this. We're not ready for this. Well, in reality, the U.S. has never been ready for Black women's vision of what's possible, but that doesn't keep us from imagining, and it doesn't keep us from creating.
Yeah, moving forward. Oh, that's a great analogy. And I love in the book that what you're really saying is, these great men didn't just arrive, out the womb as great men. There were women that poured so much into them. And I know there's a statement by Martin Luther King's older sister, that talks about, growing up in that family that was so religious. I guess his mom, Alberta, actually grows up 6 miles or 6 blocks from Ebenezer Baptist Church, where he later becomes, the pastor, and all of the activism that he grew up watching and witnessing, that really shaped who he later became as this civil rights icon. And sometimes we just think, oh, he just rolled out of bed and he was Dr. King. Like, no, that didn't happen.
I say that all the time. Like, every year we celebrate MLK Day. We're celebrating his birthday, which is around January 15th. So we celebrate around that time. But it's really kind of weird to me that I'm one of few people who thought, who else was in the room when he was born? As if MLK birthed himself, as if we're congratulating him for that. But instead to say, okay, again, this was a human being. He's not some kind of deity. He is somebody who had a mother who birthed him, parents who loved him, a community and generations of family members that poured their love into him, as well as their education around activism. They've been doing this for so long, the King and the Williams family, just fighting for their rights. And that is what he is the product of. He's not removed from that. Again, he didn't pop out of nowhere fully formed, but instead we are all, just like all 3 of these men, informed by our family. And with Alberta King's case, even Reverend Martin Luther King Sr., he was so aware that he himself couldn't have been who he was without his wife. His autobiography, which another amazing book to read, is a love letter to Alberta, who he calls his bunch of goodness and calls her his bunch as a nickname to shorten that. But he knew that when he met her, he was considered illiterate. He didn't have the same privileges and opportunities that she did. He wasn't part of the esteemed Williams family. They were the leaders of Ebenezer Baptist Church. She was the Alberta King. And he even called himself just this green country boy who fell in love with her. And luckily for him, she loved him back. But she said, even before they started, their relationship, she said, you need to be educated, not because it makes us any better than anyone else, but I've been taught that this is a part of our freedom, and it's something that I want for my family. And so she uses her ability, and she's this trained educator, has a college degree, and helps get him into Morehouse, because that's what the men in her family do. They all go to Morehouse. And then she trains him through his college education. It's not a coincidence that he goes from being considered illiterate to a couple years later graduating from one of the most important institutions in our country's history. It's because of Alberta King.
Yeah, I love the word trained. I love how you're using the word trained. I love that Alberta is training her husband, putting him on a career path. Like said, okay, if you're going to join this family, dude, here's
get on my level.
You got to raise it up. You got to step it up, because, the bar is high in this family, and not just around education, but about, servant leadership, because that's what Dr. King ultimately had in his blood.
Yeah.
In his DNA was this, this mandate, this obligation, this desire, this will to serve. And clearly, as you said, he got it, he got it honest, as we would say, from his mama. So it's, it was his mama's genes that we can give credit to when we think about all the wonderful things that Dr. King was able to accomplish. One of the other facts I loved about Malcolm X's mom, Louise, you said in the book that she kept a dictionary on the table, and she was fastidious in terms of helping her kids understand the misinformation that was being fed to them, by white supremacists during this period. That must have been so incredible when you think about Malcolm X and all of the the changes that he kind of went through as he went to jail and he came out of jail. He found, the Islamic faith, and then later, some of the epiphanies, I'll say, that he had in his life. I'm sure growing up with a mother who was like, okay, you're going to get the facts right. You're going to read what's in the newspaper, but here's what the real facts are.
Yeah. And Louise Little, a lot of times people ask me, what are some of the tangible things we can take from these women when we're teaching our own children? And then Louise Little, there are so many of these examples where you could really repeat exactly what she did, see how it works for you. And so one of her strategies was every time her children came back from school, they sat at the kitchen table with her. She would ask them what they'd been taught by their white teachers. And then she would reteach them probably quite a lot of things to make sure that it aligned with what she believed they needed to know, and that they would never feel less worthy than anybody else, etc. And one of the things that she did was she would cut these newspaper clippings and have them ready on the table of global freedom fights, so that they knew they were part of something much larger. It wasn't just happening in the US, but they were, again, part of this legacy of people. She even cuts up one of the newspapers that she wrote for, the Negro World newspaper, a reminder to them of her passion, of her talents and her ability. And then if they don't know any of the words, if they stumble on any of the words, they go to the dictionary that's right beside them, and they have to learn the new word and add it, back into their reading and continue forward with that. And it's something that Louise cared deeply about. She was multilingual. She understood the power of language. She understood the power of knowledge. And so later on, of course, as we talked about earlier, she's put away for 25 years of her life. Her children are taken away from her. This is really what leads Malcolm X down this Detroit Red path. He's lost without this constant affirmation that he used to be greeted with when he comes home from school. And he misses his mother. He's confused about what's going on. He's been told and convinced that she went crazy, and he doesn't know how to understand that or how to work through that. But then when he's starting to consider this conversion to the Nation of Islam, he writes this beautiful letter to his brother, and he says, Mom was the first one to introduce us to all of this. All of our accomplishments are Mom's. And even then, Wilfred writes back and says, remember what she used to do with us. Remember what she taught us. And this is why he pulls out the dictionary and starts writing word for word from the dictionary. And it's a story that many of us know about Malcolm X. We thought, oh, that is such an interesting fact that he wrote, every word in the dictionary. It's actually his return to his mom. And I find that to be so incredibly powerful.
Yeah, that story just gives me goosebumps because, I'm thinking like all the mothers who have flashcards or who've ever tried to teach their kids words probably owe it to Louise X, who, long before we thought of those, tools, she was using the good old-fashioned dictionary, just teaching her kids, everything about freedom fighters, as you said, and about the, global affairs, international affairs. And you're right, we learned that story about Malcolm X, but we don't learn the context. If you've read his autobiography, if you've watched, any of the movies or the documentaries on him, you know that about him, but we don't hear about Louise. Why do you think these women, Louise, Alberta, Burtis, why do you think their stories have essentially been erased from history and they're not household names?
It's heartbreaking because in everything that you were just saying, this is exactly the case. It's shocking when you read the book. When I started writing it, I just wanted to tell these women's stories in their own right. A lot of people have asked me, how did you know this was going to be interesting? I said, how did I know that Black women born in the early 1900s who birthed and raised some of the most incredible humans known to the world was going to be interesting? That was not a hard question for me. But what shocked me the most in the research was just how clear the connection was between the mothers and their sons' works. That's not what I was setting out to prove. I just wanted to tell important stories that deserve to be in the light. But then when you see, even on paper, Alberta King being this social justice warrior through her religion and through her faith, that you advance freedom causes with your privileges. You don't make you any better than anybody else, but you use them for something larger. The only difference between what she's doing with marches and boycotts and her NAACP training is that MLK calls it nonviolence, but it's the exact same thing. And then we have Louise Little, again, this activist who says you stand up for yourself by any means necessary. She has these direct confrontations with the KKK when she's pregnant with Malcolm X, and she teaches her children who are there to witness her, even if you're going to lose your life in the fight, you have to fight. And this is what Malcolm X stands for. This is what we know him for. And then Burtis Baldwin being, again, a writer who focuses on on light, and her son becomes the famous writer, James Baldwin, who says that he's a witness to the power of light. This is when it becomes shocking. And the question that you posed, why have they been erased? Why have we not, we don't know these men without knowing these women. It actually has to be intentional that you separate them, that you do it on purpose, because it's so natural to actually know these women's stories even long before they became mothers, if you want to understand these men. And I think it comes down to several different things. I think that mothers are generally overlooked. Again, our contributions within and outside of our home are very rarely recognized. So again, perfect timing for us to speak about this around Mother's Day. There's this notion that mothers have to be selfless and that we have to give up who we are in order to be the best mothers. And I don't think that that's true. And I don't think it should be the case. And I hope on Sunday, instead of thanking mothers for being selfless, instead we say, thank you for being you. Thank you for your power. Thank you for your influence. Thank you for everything that you brought into my life.
I gotta write that down and tell my kids.
Yeah. Don't thank me for not having needs of my own. I'm a human being. Thank you very much. Yeah. And then beyond that, the layer of Black womanhood and Black motherhood and how that's been treated in the United States. And so many can say, okay, yeah, Black women are the backbone, but the backbone isn't seen. I'm not the first to say that, but this is what the problem is. We're constantly relegated to the back, constantly just taken for granted, while people are well aware that things could not exist and could not move forward without us. But we aren't given that recognition. We aren't given that credit. And it's not only about giving me an applause as a Black mother. That's not what I'm looking for. But that kind of respect and that kind of actual disrespect translates into a lack of protection, a lack of policy that would say make it easier for women and mothers to do their jobs and again, and outside of the house. We saw this in the pandemic even, that there are not systems in place. Women of color were forced over and over again to choose between working or being moms. And that shouldn't have been the choice that they had and that they were forced to make. So there's just so much that goes into this, but I do hope that this book helps in our general conversation around a culture shift. I believe the Biden-Harris administration are doing, historic things, and I hope that we can really get behind this generally. I think storytelling also makes a difference. A lot of people aren't necessarily following policy, but if you connect with Alberta, Bertus, and Louise, and then you think about what would have made their lives easier and what could make lives easier for mothers today, I actually think it can contribute to the solution.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, a lot of people, I don't know, 1% to 5% of the country is probably hypersensitive about politics and tuned into that, but the majority of the people are just going about their everyday lives. So if they can connect with a story of a mother who's had, some similar struggles that they've had, then I think it definitely can resonate in a way that, the kind of the political conversation that happens on, cable network doesn't with so many people. I want to ask you, though, about these mothers, and we talked about their intersectionality. What do you think was the biggest lie that they had to fight against in terms of what was being told to them as well as their kids? So, we're now hearing, that to put it in political terms, Trump didn't lose the election. Somehow that big lie is being told by some segment of our population. What do you think during their era was one of the biggest lies about, the U.S., racism, white supremacy that they had to combat?
Oh, and that's such a good question, because as we know, so many lies, and we've had to fight against misinformation and disinformation for so incredibly long. In each chapter of the book, I very specifically address tropes that have been used against Black women. And so that's the thought that comes to mind first, in terms of how many have used these tropes to justify abuses against Black women, and telling us it's your fault that this is happening to you and nobody else's. It's not the system's fault. It's not our country's fault. It's not our leaders' fault. It's women's fault. It's Black women's fault. And so I'm referencing the Jezebel trope, for instance, that said, if Black women are being sexually abused and persecuted or raped, it's because they're the ones who are asking for that. Or that the mammy trope, that, it's not that Black women, want to be separated from these white families, or that they want to have time to take care of their own family. No, they're very happy to be servants. So that's why we're not going to pay them as much as they deserve to be paid. We're not going to treat them with respect and dignity in domestic work. We're going to relegate them to that because that's what they want to do. They're the mammies of our nation. And Aunt Jemima becomes extremely popular at a time when Black women are saying, and have said all along, this is not who we are. Why are you confining us in this way? The matriarch trope that says that if Black families are being separated from each other, it's because Black women are emasculating their men and not because of policies designed to separate us and to incarcerate our loved ones. Or if it's the welfare queen saying, if a Black woman is receiving the supports that she deserves for herself and for her children, oh, well, you're only doing this because you want to take money from us. This is all on you. Again, never speaking about the social ills that are causing her to not have the support that she needs to work or to continue school or to just breathe for a second, God forbid. And then even down to even calling us the strong Black woman, which some of us have, held with pride because we feel it's the only option we have. But the reality is even that is very dehumanizing to trick us into thinking we have to carry all of this on our shoulders alone. It all comes down to us. But when you think about the progression of these tropes, it makes sense that the final one is, yeah, it does all come down to you. You're going to have to deal with this. Nobody else is going to help you, but that's not the case. It should not be the case. And I would say that's the biggest lie out of the many that Black women are facing day in and day out, but others trying to define us for us rather than allowing us to define ourselves. But I will end by saying that, as Melissa Harris Perry always says, we are not a conquered victim. We have agency and we have fought against those lies day in and day out. They have not limited us.
Yeah, no, excellent quote. I want to ask you about one thing that, again, intersectionality of these moms. All three of them outlived their very famous sons. Mm-hmm. How did the death of their sons impact them?
And that was the hardest chapter for me to write. From the beginning of the book, I say that in case anybody didn't know, that the mothers outlived their sons, these famous sons, because I want us to be very aware of it. Again, going back into the humanity of who these women were, as well as who these sons were, that we want to get to know them and love them, but also remember that this really tragic ending is coming for the men, and what that means for their moms and what that means for their loved ones, their children, their families. Again, just remembering they were human beings and this is painful, and we need to really sit here and think about that emotion and that pain. It's interesting because with each woman, depending on the circumstances of her own life, her response after her son passes away is very different. So with Louise Little, because she'd been taken from her children for 25 years of her life, when she's released finally after a quarter of a century, she reunites with her children, has this beautiful moment with them, something that Malcolm X even talks to Alex Haley about. And only a year later, he's assassinated and taken from her once again. And in this moment, she decides to focus, excuse me, in this moment, she decides to focus on her grandchildren and educating the next generation of her family. And it's really, even especially in Betty and Malcolm's children's case, they know her better than Malcolm did, because again, he didn't have this time with her. But Louise takes this as her next charge to tell her grandchildren about her people, about their history, and really just replicating a lot of the things that she taught her own children. So I find that to be really beautiful. She passes away 25 years later. She lives for another 25 years after this. And then with Bertis Baldwin, of course, she had a little bit more time with James Baldwin, and she's able to witness even more the influence of his work, and he is as well. They remain incredibly close throughout their lives, like share letters with each other if they're not together in person. And she passes away very peacefully and in good health in 1999. She lives an extremely long life, is born in 1902 and then lives up until 1999. And then with Alberta King, I've saved her till last because it's the most tragic ending in all three of the women's stories. Only a couple years after losing MLK Jr., and not only losing him, but also losing her second son, AD, in a drowning incident that still is very suspicious because he was a good swimmer. It was his own pool, and he was also very involved in the civil rights movement. She herself is assassinated in her church while she's playing the organ, and she was shot in the back.
Yeah. No, of course, everyone probably remembers her for that. And to the extent she got any notoriety, it was around that assassination that happened with her. You wrote this book, Anna, a lot of it when you were pregnant yourself with your first child. How was it, all the emotions we have as pregnant women? How was it when you're researching? And some of this is dark, a lot of it's really beautiful, but some of it's very sad. What was going through your mind, as you're contemplating what it's going to be like to be a first-time mother yourself, and you're researching these three amazing mothers?
It was, oh goodness, it's hard to summarize in words. On one hand, very painful and very difficult. Writing this book, there were many times where I was crying. When I got to the chapter that I had to write about their sons dying, I had to really separate myself for a moment, because I was very intentional in writing the book, and each chapter using the word our, OUR, this is our story, the circumstances of our birth, loving our sons. And when I got to that chapter, it's titled Losing Our Sons, I thought, oh, maybe just for this chapter, I'll change the title. But I also then realized, okay, I just need to be vulnerable with this. I think the more vulnerable that writers are willing to be, then the more vulnerable our readers believe that they can be as well with us. And this book is about, this biography, yes, and about so much more, about healing. And this is why the final chapter is all about how we move forward as a nation, how we heal as a nation, and what we learn from Alberta, Bertus, and Louise's stories. And so there was that emotion, definitely. There was also the hard parts of writing about these atrocities that we're all aware of, but I try my best to give even more context into the human stories behind this, so that it doesn't go over our heads like, oh, we know these terrible things happened, but instead we really witness the pain, and we really understand the humanity that was robbed, and the attempts of robbing that humanity. But then I also, again, at the beginning of our conversation, I said it's also important for us to celebrate our joy and our love and our life, and the ways in which we've created lives, not only through birthing our children, but through our art and through our activism. And Black women see, the birth of our children each time as the world starting over. This is something June Jordan said. It's an opportunity to change the world. We are passing transformational knowledge and liberation through our bodies and through our teachings. Again, not only through biological motherhood, but through all the different ways in which we mother, and all of those that are doing mothering work. And that gave me incredible hope, and I felt empowered. And so lastly, I'll say that the book made me feel so powerful and influential as a mother. And I think it allows me to have the energy that you really need to be a mother. If I ever feel unappreciated, or if I ever feel like someone's trying to erase me, I don't accept it. I immediately say something, and I say, I think, poor husband of mine has to deal with this constantly. I'm like, whoa, you're not going to erase me from the story. Or if someone says something like, especially because I have a son and I have another on the way due in August, so another baby is with us now.
Congratulations.
Thank you so much. But with my son, even from the moment he was born, people would say things like, he's so strong, he's going to be just like his dad, and he's so smart, maybe he'll be the mayor of a city one day. And I'll immediately say, okay, first of all, I work out a lot more than my husband does. I'm the one who went through labor, talk about strength. And secondly, maybe he's going to write a critically acclaimed book, just like his mom. So I think it's important also that us as mothers, again, going into Mother's Day, that we see ourselves in that power and in that strength that this role deserves, because we are doing the work. And that's not to over-romanticize motherhood. I understand that there are circumstances where mothers are making mistakes, and there aren't always positive relationships. But I think in many ways, we don't extend the grace and the forgiveness to motherhood that it deserves. And so I think more generally, most moms are really doing the very best that they can, and they deserve to be treated with that kind of dignity.
What would you say, Anna, to a mother that's watching this and, is not feeling so proud about the job that they're doing, and, are feeling like they, that this motherhood stuff is hard?
Yeah.
And, they're not getting it right. There are a lot of mothers who, are like have a sense of consciousness about what it means to be a mother, particularly a Black mother, have the support of a wonderful husband who was the mayor of a city in California and who, is highly respected in, the political field. But, they don't feel like they either have support from a partner or a spouse, or just themselves aren't feeling like they're up to the task. Give them some words of encouragement as we, in the interview. I'd love to know what, and then I'd love to also know what you would say to those mothers. And then what do you think our three mothers who are the focus of the book, Louise, Burtis, and Alberta, would say to those mothers?
Yeah, it's interesting because I have had the privilege of not only writing this book, but at the same time, I was writing my dissertation for my PhD around motherhood and maternal theory. And I'm an academic who doesn't love academia, if I'm being completely honest. I prefer for things to be much more inclusive. I don't like the performance of the jargon, et cetera. But I do love the research and I love diving into these things. And I say that because my understanding is through the lens of maternal theory and Black feminist theory. And I know how strategic it is to make moms feel like they're always messing up, or that there's always something that they could do better. There's always, like, the burden is constantly placed on us. If something went wrong, or if you're feeling tired that day, well, you just need to get it together. Or if you can't make ends meet by the end of the month, well, this is really on you. You're not working hard enough. When the reality is this is related, like I said before, not only to the lack of celebration and the lack of recognition that women deserve, but also to the lack of policy, the lack of support that we deserve. So motherhood isn't the thing that's really making us that tired. It's the lack of support that this role deserves. And it's not our children who are doing it. It's not our children who we can blame. It's, again, this lack of societal support. So I'm the kind of person who, as much as I believe there does need to be this change in our own understanding of our motherhood, it doesn't fall on us. And that allows me to give myself forgiveness and grace. I've definitely made mistakes. I mean, my son is only 18 months old, but I'm realizing, especially he's going through this phase now where he is starting to find words, but is frustrated when he can't, so he might try to pull my hair or do something that I'm like, why are you doing this to me? And then you say, oh, should I have yelled or should I have done that? Oh no, I feel so bad, but I'm a human being. And I think more moms just need to understand we're human and we make mistakes and we're doing our best, but also we need to realize there's a lot that's stacked against us, and very strategically so. So we have to start thinking about how we fight that, how we push forward for policy that will make the burden so much easier. Having parental leave for the amount of time that we deserve. If we have partners and they're also granted parental leave, that can make a huge difference. Having access to universal childcare, or maybe universal basic income, as my husband talks about quite often. All of these things matter. All of these things would make it a lot easier for us to be patient in those moments. And I'm able to really recognize that because I have so many privileges. I'm a writer and I'm paid well to do my writing. That means that I have flexibility in my schedule, so I can have a little more time and patience if my son decides he wants to draw on the floor with a smoothie. But so many moms don't have that. They don't have that same support system. So don't put it on yourself. Just let some of the burden off your shoulders and realize that you're not imagining these things. You are being unsupported, most likely. And we need to lean on each other as much as possible, I would say, as well. And because that was such a long answer, I'll make this the shorter part for the three women. I would say it's very similar in terms of a vulnerability that they were willing to show. I don't think the three of them, they didn't turn off their humanity for their children. There are moments in the book where they express that they're worried or that they're sad about something. And it's not all the time. Of course, they also are doing whatever they can to continue to be strong. But there are examples of them saying, I need help, or I'm going to find community, or I'm going to have people around me, or I'm going to be have a community of people that are not only mothering my children, but I'm helping to mother other children as well. It's also this distraction that happens a lot in the US where we say to moms, everything falls on your shoulders. You are the one. And that is actually, it's not in line with most traditions. It's not in line with many countries. Instead, it really should be, this is our community child. We're all going to take care of this child.
Yeah.
I don't have to be the only one.
Talk a lot about, it takes a village. And I think what you're saying is that those women, the three iconic women in the book, shared that view. I know you're working on another book, right? About mothers of historic female leaders.
Yes.
When does it come out?
I haven't sold it yet. It's just an idea still, but I want to talk about, it's actually going to be a picture book. So it's a children's book to talk about the mothers of contemporary Black female leaders. And I've also been working on a novel for several years that tackles disinformation, as well as domestic violence and sexual violence against women. So I do fiction and nonfiction. A lot of people actually who read The Three Mothers often will say, this reads like a fiction, it reads like a novel. We're like getting to know these characters in the book. And that's such a compliment to me, because I get worried that when people see that I'm a PhD student, or that I'm about to finish my PhD, I just have to do my corrections. I'm just taking my sweet time with that. But that they're going to think it's very academic, or that it's, hard to get through. And that is not the case. I did my best to make it as enjoyable a read as possible, because I think that's how we really connect with people. So I'm excited to just keep writing. I'm really living the dream right now. I'm grateful for that. And I'll just keep getting work out there.
Well, I would love to have you back when either of those, the picture book or the fiction, drops. I'm sure you're going to get it sold. You're going to have lots of folks bidding for it, which is what happens when you write a critically acclaimed book on your first, write. So again, congratulations on all the things that are happening. Your book is, blowing up. You are about to have your second child, and you're about to get your PhD. So I would say you're like in Black girl magic heaven right now.
Thank you. I do. I feel like it. And just having your affirmation, it means the world to me. Thank you so much.
Again, the book is The Three Mothers, How the Mothers of Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, and James Baldwin Shaped a Nation. If you don't have this book, you still have time to run out and get it for that favorite mother or female figure in your life, someone that's mothered you, nurtured you, doesn't have to be your biological mother. This is a book for I'd say any woman. You don't even have to be, a mother. You don't have to have children, but if you're a woman, you have experienced something like the three women in this book have, and you will find such community in this book, particularly African-American mothers who are often, as you said, erased in our society, will be uplifted, encouraged, motivated, and empowered by the words in this book. Again, thank you so much, Anna, for joining me, and best of luck as you continue this amazing whirlwind tour as a critically acclaimed author.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Wow, another big thank you to Anna for giving us life on this Mother's Day edition of the Special Report. Now for my panel of mothers, I had to talk to some other mothers who are out here doing incredible work as well. So I want to welcome back to the show Victoria Moran. She is a mental health professional and the mother of a 12-year-old daughter. Also joining us is Pastor Marea Perry. She is a pastor and director of Secrets to Truths, a nonprofit which helps mothers and girls heal from trauma. She is the mother of 6. And back with us is Dr. Alfiee Breland-Noble. She is a psychologist, nonprofit leader, and a mother of 2 teenagers. And making her debut appearance on the show is Melody Gross. She is the founder of Courageous Shift, a nonprofit working with domestic violence victims. And she is the mother of a 12-year-old son. Welcome, ladies. And thank you so much for all joining me on this Mother's Day weekend. You all were able to listen to Anna Tubbs talk about her amazing new books. I don't know if you've read it yet, but I'll start with you, Dr. Breland-Noble. What stood out for you as you listened to Anna talk about Malcolm's mom, Dr. King's mom, and James Baldwin's mother?
I think about something that we often hear from white feminism, which is about well-behaved women, right, are rarely honored. I forget what the whole, the saying actually is. But then I think history. There you go. Rarely make history. That's it. Thank you. You always correct me. I appreciate you so much, my sister. And I think about Black women specifically and women of color in general. Forget making history. Your name is just not even mentioned, right? So it may be that you're not in the history books if you're white. You don't exist if you're Black, right? And so the fact that she's the first person to dig all this information up and to give us all that context I was blown away when she talked about the dictionary and how the dictionary came from what his mama taught him.
Yes.
I'd never heard that.
Yes.
So I was just like in my feelings with chills because these Black women, they were no joke. We were all back here like this. Let's go, let's go. So it was amazing. Kudos to that sister. It was amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, I got to give it up for my production team for finding her. I actually know her husband, but I knew that she's like this super big brain person that graduated with all kinds of honors from Stanford and is doing amazing. She's a Bill and Melinda Gates scholar at Cambridge University. I mean, so her credentials are impeccable. But to be honest, I didn't know about this book. And so I got to give a big kudos and shout out to my production team for finding her.
Yes.
Because what could be better on this Mother's Day weekend than to be talking to a young woman like Anna, who stepped out there, first book, and to have it blow up like this and to honor these three women. So yeah, I was feeling the same way when she was talking about that dictionary. Like, okay, we had like flashcards and we try to teach our kids words, but Louise Little was no joke. She's sitting there with a dictionary. So I just had visions of a Black mother at a table, like telling her kids, sit down, shut up, listen to this, repeat those words, spell those words. And so, and from that, we get Malcolm X. Wow. So amazing. Hey, Pastor Perry, I got to ask you, you are such a bright light. You have lost a son. You have 6 kids. So for you, when you think about Mother's Day and you think about what Black mothers in particular are the conversations we're having to have around, police violence and what's happening in the news, what's going through your mind this Mother's Day weekend?
That's a big one. Thank you for asking. Excuse me. I think of the many times that I'll miss loving on my son, and the worry that I have for my other Black sons and my daughters who are faced with the challenges of white supremacists. You have police violence, you have community violence that continues to flood our communities. And so, I often think about that. So this Mother's Day, for me, there's a miss, but I'm also thankful for the opportunity to turn my pain into power. And that was during my time of loss, finding healthier ways to live, knowing that the pain is never going to leave. And I'm always going to have that missing feeling for someone that I love deeply, that taught me how to mother his other siblings. So I know how he saw me, and that's the mother that I would always want to continue to be. He remembered me to be a strong mother. He believed me to continue to do the work that I do in community, to bring awareness on what violence looks like and to add healing to community in times such as this, as we all heard. So I'm reminded again of my pain, that I'm turning into power by again approaching it with healthier ways to be the best version of myself each day that I wake up. So
wow, that's I think we all just want to take a moment to just share as mothers your pain, having lost your son.
thank you.
I was just reading this morning, New York Times did this incredible piece about violence and gun violence. And it says, if you want to talk to the experts on gun violence, whether it's violence in our communities or police violence, talk to Black mothers. And this is a sister out of Chicago, and she interviewed all of these mothers across the country and asking them, what they thought the solutions were to both police violence as well as gun violence in our community. So I know you've done a lot of work around this, police violence, and you've done a lot of work helping mothers, turning their pain, just like you described, turning their pain into purpose. And I just want to say thank you for doing that. And I think Anna said, sometimes people listen when you tell stories. They may think of her as a PhD candidate and think this book is too academic. And I say the same about this gun violence. When people see faces, when they see the pain of real people that have experienced it, that's what I think resonates with our policymakers and our elected officials. So thank you for putting a face to that pain. I want to ask you, Melody, first of all, thank you for, joining us this morning. You're new to the program. All of these other amazing women I've had the pleasure of getting to know. Alfiee and I are like, we like homies now across the country. In Victoria, I've known for many, many years. She's a dear friend. Uh, Melody, you work with domestic violence victims, and you were the victim yourself of domestic violence. And now you're a single mom raising a 12-year-old son who's full of energy and full of life. We saw him in New York City, Times Square, just living it up. What are you saying to this 12-year-old?
Yeah. So we thank you for having me. And I'm brutally honest with him. We have that type of relationship where I don't hold any punches. I let him be free. I'm all about having, raising liberated children, but also being realistic, right? And letting him know that these are situations that happen. We had honest conversations, and I was able to give him the space to process what we experienced together. Because even though he may not have seen direct results of the domestic violence, he felt it, And so it's important that I gave him that space to process, to share how he's feeling, and to also show him the opposite of that. So then bringing in positive Black role models so that he can understand that not every Black man is an abuser. There are Black men who absolutely support Black women, and this is what it looks like. So it's very intentional, having those conversations, and it starts really early. So this happened about 5 years ago, and we've had that conversation since. So we constantly have conversations about healthy relationships and what that looks like, boundaries and consent, and being a feminist in his own right, right?
I love it.
And this thing with his friends where he tells his friends, I love you. He's like, I don't want to be toxic, so I love you. Oh. And let's start that early,
Okay. Wow, that's amazing. All right, Victoria, jump in this. You have a daughter. You have a biracial daughter. Yeah, we're just being honest here. All these issues. So you've got to talk to her about race, and you've got to talk to her about what it means to be a biracial girl in America right now when the country is so divided. And, there's so much hatred directed towards, Black people. White supremacists are attacking, African Americans at every front. But yes, she has a dad who's white. So what are those conversations like in your house?
Oh my goodness. Thank you for the question. Thank you. I feel like I'm among queens right now. It's funny because the biggest issue that I'm going through, I feel, you mentioned her being biracial. She is, I would say triracial, because her dad is Native American and white. He looks phenotypically white. So my daughter lights up the world. I light up Africa and Europe. He lights up Asia and Europe, because his Native American ancestors, Lenape tribe, came from Mongolia. So that goes back to the DNA. So my daughter lights up, when she's like biracial, I'm almost like triracial, because she, lights up Asia, Africa, and Europe. So the thing for me is, like, she started a middle school last year in 6th grade, and she shows up to the Black Student Association, and they're like, you don't belong here, because phenotypically she looks closer to her dad's skin tone. And she says that's colorism. And she said, tell me where I'm supposed to go. I may not be mitigating these like transgressions like you are if you have darker skin. However, I'm experiencing transgressions. Look at my hair. Look how I carry myself. I came into school, like, repping for Nipsey Hussle and, colonialism and all kind of things. And so tell me where I'm supposed to go. And seniors were like, what's your name? And so because of that, now she's on the diversity leadership team at her school. And she's came home yesterday and said, I may run for president of student council. And the current president said, you have such a voice and you're so passionate. And she was talking about race. And I just have to say that the public school that she went to had a Black principal, Antoinette, so I'm standing on her shoulders, and had a vice principal that's Asian and a Black woman as principal. And so they had a math specialist that was a Black man, and a librarian that was Black that would give my daughter special readings. And something that gave me chills hearing about these mothers, Louise, Alberta, Berdice, I have to say their name. I didn't even know their names. It reminds me of all the time in the Bible book, like I'm licensed to preach in the AME church, and my first sermon was on Naaman and the nameless servant. We don't know these women's names. We have to know their names, like Malcolm X in the dictionary. We know he did that in the movie in prison, but we don't know his mom taught him that. That wasn't in the movie. So I've always had my daughter keep 2 notes. So during quarantine, it was this awful double-edged sword, because when she said, why did the police, after they murdered George Floyd, I went back and said our country's first police force were slave patrols, and pulled up the star icons that looked like the sheriff. And I did a 400 timeline into how we got to now. And I was weeping during it. I used audio, I used books, I had my dad talk what it was like for him, because my dad said he's 81, he'll be 81 in July. And he said when Emmett Till died, Emmett Till was 14, my dad was 15. He said his childhood ended. My dad stopped having a childhood at 15. And so to have that recapitulated in this generation, I had her call up my dad and say, what was that like to have your childhood ended at 15? Yeah. And so it's been this double-edged like sword, because you have this responsibility. And so hearing about these women, it gives you a template. Seeing you, Areva, I'm gonna call her doctor already, right? Like Dr. Anna, like it gives me a template. Seeing you, Melody, seeing you, Pastor Perry, seeing you, Dr. Alfiee, it gives me a template. And about being like vulnerable. Something that you may not know is that in my first marriage, I had domestic violence. And so I talked to my daughter about boundaries and consent and what's the kind of person you should have. So even in her friendship group at lunch, it was a classmate was that they didn't know that Amanda was fast. So why are you running track? And she said, I don't like how you're talking with me, and got up and moved her lunch elsewhere. And because I've taught her with boundaries, because I don't want her to be in a situation like me where my face is split open and have to learn boundaries, and still learning boundaries at 50. So, I'm kind of getting really emotional because I see so much of myself in each one of these stories and the mothers, but it's an awesome, painful, powerful privilege to be her mother. And she's been my greatest gift and my greatest teacher. She brought me to yoga because I was training for the LA Marathon, and I couldn't keep up my mileage second trimester. And so I started doing yoga, and now I'm in yoga teacher training. And so,
kids teach us, we can count on our kids to teach us things that open our minds if we're open to it. I want to get Dr. Alfiee to jump back in, because I think we have to talk about race. We can't avoid it. Our kids are being confronted, Dr. Alfiee, with, Victoria said her daughter was told you don't belong here. The kids are turning on the television, they're going to social media, and there are all these conversations that are taking place around race, and a lot of it is very, very negative. How are mothers, in particular Black mothers, what's the best way we can have these conversations with our kids?
I always say it, I try to say it very succinctly. We start from a place of being in touch with ourselves. So we have to understand where we are. Where do we sit in this space? How are we feeling emotionally? How are we processing our own experiences? To Sister Moran, when she just spoke, how do we process our own lived experience against what our children are experiencing? I think if we don't start there, it's very difficult for us to be able to engage in these conversations with our children. After that, I think it's really trying to understand, right? It's like seek first to understand, then to be understood. So you got to right? So you want to listen. And so this idea of active listening, right? Being attentive. Don't have your device up. Put your device down. Put your eyes on your child's eyes. If your child wants to look down, maybe okay. But you make sure that every time they look up, your eyes are right there on them. So it's signaling that you are ready to have these conversations with your children, signaling that you're comfortable letting them just say what they got to say, right? Because there's going to be a lot of stuff you don't agree with, but that's okay. They're their own individuals. The other thing I say to parents is when you're blessed to have multiple children, I wanted to be like Sister Perry. I didn't quite get that far, but I wanted to get there. Is each child is unique. And I know she could speak to this quite eloquently. And so you give each child what each child means. My mom's deceased. It'll be 15 years this this year. And that's one of the things that she taught me. She treated my brother and I very differently. She gave us each what we needed. Those are some of the, I think, the practical things that we have to do, I think, to engage our children and make them feel seen and heard and valued, especially for our Black kids. We got to be the ones to make them feel seen, heard, and valued, just like these sisters from this book.
Yeah. Pastor Perry, you're in Minneapolis, the epicenter of everything that's happening around racial justice right now. You know, the George Floyd murder, the trial of Derek Chauvin. Just yesterday or this morning, federal prosecutors unveiled indictments, federal civil rights indictments against the 4 officers involved in George Floyd's murder. There's a federal investigation that's now happening of that police department, a pattern and practice investigation. There's going to be a trial of the other 3 officers that's happening in August. There's going to be the sentencing of Chauvin in June. I mean, it just doesn't end. I mean, it's just such an avalanche of things, you know, this legal process, and I'm a part of it. And I know, and I feel the weight of it myself as a lawyer and as a mother, but you're a mother in the middle of it. You've been at the protest, you've been talking to the folks on the grounds, and you have your kids at home that are either, you know, hearing about it on social, probably not watching news on cable like most kids don't, but they know what's going on. How challenging is it for you as a mother in this moment to be talking to your kids about, you know, how do they walk outside and trust the Minneapolis Police Department? And let me just say this: one of the things that we now know about the federal civil rights indictment, Derek Chauvin put his knee on the neck of a 14-year-old in 2017, not for 9 minutes, but for 17 minutes. Hit the kid over the head with a flashlight. And all this is happening in front of his mother. So this is a perpetual, you know, predator who was allowed to prey on our community for years. That happened in 2017. George Floyd happened in 2020. So that guy, Chauvin, was on the street 3 years after he had choked a kid till he was unconscious. So how do your kids walk out the door and feel safe?
No, we have, I'm very transparent with the kids. And as we all mentioned before, it's like listening to them and allowing them that space to actually share how they feel. And so I know that, you know, dealing with my babies, they have some fear about coming outside, and their dad, their grandpa was actually the ex-chief of police. So here we are, you know, with these relationships with the police officer. So how do you balance the love that you know that you get from grandpa, and then you have to fear his other, you know, his other colleagues that don't look like him, but may look like him and may be causing issues as well. So, you know, I'm trying to create the balance of you can always share how you feel, and then to work toward, you know, the trust issues that they do have for police officers that may not be grandpa. And so again, I'm like meeting them where they are. They all have their own different opinion as to what that looks like. They don't fear grandpa, but they actually fear the police. So there's some tightness in the chest when it comes to, you know, the kids. And then you have one of the boys that, you know, wants to be SWAT. So then we're having that conversation. So it's not where I tell him, no, you cannot be. Just because these are happening, that means that you can become a better SWAT, you know, than any other, you know. And so we're having these conversations. And again, you know, it's a heavy load, but I want to remember that, you know, to meet them where they are and love on them through their experience of not trusting police officers, and still encourage them to be who they are, and that they're protected. And that's why I'm on the front lines. That's why I continue to do the work that I'm doing, because I want to make sure that, you know, me fighting for you gives me a feeling of, you know, you may have a better chance than others, but I want to make sure that they see me actively doing the work so they can at least have a little bit of hope, knowing that if my mom is out there, then I can be okay. We may be okay. I may find some joy. I may do something, but I want them to see it. So as long as I keep them involved, oftentimes I don't take them to the protest, you know, with me, because when it's high energy, I want to make sure that I'm in, you know, that position to protect. My job is to protect and serve too with the community and make sure that they're okay. And I don't, you know, I can't do both and then when I'm with the babies. So I try to leave them. Then I go home and I share stories and they ask questions. I have my 9-year-old little girl, you know, she's asking questions, and they're all still concerned about, you know, just the you know, the police violence And then now the community violence, because my son was murdered by a community member. And so, and he was just sitting in his car. So, for them, they have these layers of fear of like, who can I trust?
Yeah.
Who's going to be there for me? So
No,
we have some tightness.
I'm glad you brought that up about your kid's grandfather, because one of my colleagues I work with on CNN, another legal analyst, his father was a police officer. So oftentimes when we're having these conversations, we forget that a lot of African American, men and women serve in police departments and serve very admirably, and we fought so that they could become leaders in these departments. And they fought through, rank discrimination, many of them having to sue cities and police departments for race discrimination, sex discrimination, in order to become captains and to become police chiefs. And I remember thinking about the police chief from Minneapolis who testified in Chauvin's trial. And I talked to one of the activists on the ground, and she said, that chief heart aches for what, is happening in that department. And a lot of what, when he talks about the sanctity of life, that's his aspiration, unfortunately not shared by everybody on that department. So I'm glad you brought your kid's grandfather up, because, in this conversation, we got to make room for all of that. And Black kids who want to be police officers. One of the kids that I mentor, his lifelong dream was to be an FBI agent. And today he is a federal law enforcement agent. And no matter what's happened in the news, for him, this is his way to change law enforcement and to show kids a better, law enforcement. So I'm glad you brought that up. I'll ask you, Melody, I'm running out of time, but I do want to ask you, what is it about motherhood that, Anna hasn't said, that my other, esteemed panelists haven't said? What should we go into this Mother's Day weekend focused on as it relates to motherhood?
Yeah. So Anna did touch on it. And one of the things was sometimes we as mothers don't get it right. We have mothers who, could be toxic or have their own experiences. And I was one of those people where we are still building our relationship. And it took a lot of work. It took a lot of healing work for me to say, that my mother, I can accept that my mother had these experiences, that definitely shaped her. And I can also accept the fact that there was harm done for me. So how do I unpack that, right? How do I deal with that? And for me, it was a lot of journaling. It was a lot of therapy. It was a lot of counseling to kind of really deal with that and accept it, and understand that this is the situation, but we're still working towards a healthier relationship. I think that her experience as a victim of domestic violence played a huge role in our relationship as well, because even though I saw it, I was around it, she didn't really talk about it too much, right?
You talking about your mom?
My mom, yeah. Okay. So I think when we remove that stigma of not talking about domestic violence in the Black community amongst Black mothers, we can then begin to heal, and that's generational. Right? So when we start to heal ourselves, we heal the generation ahead of us and behind us. And we just have to keep doing that and keep having that conversation. So I think that's one thing I would say going into Mother's Day is let's talk about the trauma of hurt and pain, especially around domestic violence, especially around abuse, that our mothers have experienced. And what are we going to do as a community to remove the stigma and get the resources needed for survivors to develop new lives after abuse?
Yeah. And I'm sure Dr. Alfiee would add to that, remove the stigma of mental health, because that's another
100%. Yes.
stigma in our community. And we don't, I just lost a dear friend of mine who was a very, very accomplished physician in my hometown in St. Louis. And she suffered from some severe mental health challenges at the end of her life. And it's just amazing how I was telling a friend, I said, if she had cancer, everybody in that church or mortuary would have said, oh, she died from cancer. Yeah. But the word mental health never entered the conversation. It was like taboo, don't say anything. And even myself, I didn't feel like it was right for me to talk openly about it, because the family had not uttered the words, So hopefully on this Mother's Day weekend, as we're talking to our children and our mothers, that, some of those things that have been off limits, we can bring out the closet. Because as you just said so, eloquently, Melody, we can't heal what we don't acknowledge. And some of this trauma is generational. A lot of it's generational. I want to thank you ladies for helping us just have this amazing Mother's Day show. Pastor Perry, you know, heart goes out to you. Just can't imagine the pain that you've been through, but you are standing tall and are such an example for so many mothers. And we have so many mothers that have lost their sons, be it to gun violence in the community or police violence. And they only need look at you and the example that you're setting. So thank you so much, Melody. Thank you for talking about domestic violence, because you and Victoria both have experienced it, and getting it out of the closet is one way we start to correct it in our community. Dr. Alfiee, you just a badass. So, you just keep being badass, okay? You just keep doing that. And thank you, Victoria, for always being here when I need you. Amazing panels. You all have the most amazing Mother's Day ever. And keep being brilliant and keep lifting up these causes in our community. So many women are counting on us and looking to all of you. So again, thank you this morning for joining me. Wow. I want to thank all of my guests. What an amazing show. I know it's a little longer, but that's okay because we had shit to cover this morning. That's the beauty of being on the internet. You can use words like shit. But again, I want to thank my guests. Anna's book is so important. If you have not gotten your copy of it, make sure you go to your nearest online store, your store in the mall, wherever books are sold, and get a copy of this book. It is the perfect Mother's Day gift for any woman, and I should say man too, because men have mothers. So this book isn't just for women. This book is for men as well. Men should learn about the three women that shaped three of the most influential Black men in U.S. history. So make sure you pick up that book. Also, as Anna Jarvis taught us, Mother's Day is not just about brunch and mimosas and flowers and expensive gifts. This is a time for women and men to be proactive. This is a time for us to celebrate, our social activism. So do something nice for someone. Rake the leaves of an elderly neighbor. Donate some time at a shelter. Even write a small check to a women's organization. This is the time to, really demonstrate that motherhood is about so many different things. And key to being a mother is being of service, whether it's to your children or your community. We know that mothers are always serving others. So get out there and do something nice for others. Some words to live by before I get out. Malcolm X said it best. The mother is the first teacher of the child. The message she gives that child gives to the world. These words resonate with me every day, and particularly during this weekend, because see, I was fortunate to have some amazing women who nurtured me, from my mother to my aunts and my amazing godmother. They didn't have a lot of money. In fact, they didn't have any money. They didn't even have a lot of education, but they were incredibly wise, and they poured into me priceless values. And one of the most important lessons they taught me was that to whom much is given, much is expected. Now, I've tried my best, and as we've talked about this morning, not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, and my kids will all say amen to that, but I've tried my best to instill the values from my mother, my grandmother, and my aunts into my kids. So when I see them serving at a local homeless shelter, I don't think my job as cook, housekeeper, driver, counselor, tutor, personal shopper, cheerleader, breadwinner, piggy bank owner is over. But watching them serve others does let me know that as much as it appears that they may not be listening, indeed they are. And this mother thing is working, and there is hope for all mothers. So to all of those mothers out there who are holding it down every day, doing the best that you can, who are raising amazing kids and even raising kids that are, giving you trouble, I want you to know that we see you and we love you. Also, a special tribute to my cousin Dana. She was the mother of 3 kids, and unfortunately, she passed away just this Wednesday from a long illness. She was only 50 years old. So I want to say to Dana, rest in power, my beautiful cousin. I'm out, y'all. Be safe out there. Wear your mask, and remember, we are all in this together.